Okay. Thank you for joining us for our third Lunch and Learn. Today's topic is company culture, why it's important, how you can maintain it, how you can create it. Our panelists today are Mark Weber, whom everyone knows, I'm sure, and Victor Lanzo, who joins us from Reveal Surgical. So before we get started, I thought it would be great if our two panelists could just introduce themselves and especially for those of you who know Mark, they might not be so familiar with his career before he joined McGill, and which also informs his opinion on company culture. So with that in mind, perhaps Mark, I'll turn to you for a quick self-introduction.
Thanks, Genji, and thanks, Victor, for joining us today as well. So hi, everyone. So just a quick introduction. So I did my degrees in chemical engineering at McGill. After I finished my PhD, I moved to Calgary. So I lived there for 15 years. Most of my work was in the chemical industry. So my background is in plastics. So I worked for a company that made polyethylene for much of that time. So about 10 of those years. I started as product development scientist, bringing products to market, pretty much what people are trying to do with technologies to develop at McGill. And then I got into leadership of teams. I led technical service teams. I led some early stage research teams. But I also did work in the oil sands as well and in the energy sector. I worked for a startup. I was a vice president of engineering. I was a project manager for a number of oil sands projects. And then I decided to move back to Montreal a little over 10 years ago. I worked for a startup as a director of implementation. Then I came to McGill into technology transfer. Now it's the director of the Office of Innovation and Partnerships. So I've had a number of leadership roles in my career in industries ranging from obviously here in an academic setting to larger companies, to startups, to consulting firms. So that's kind of informed my feelings on building teams and culture.
A very diverse background. Thanks for that. Victor, over to you.
It's really hard to go after Mark, that's for sure. He sets the bar really, really high. Well, I started my career in orthopedics as an operations manager, where I helped bring to market some innovations in the spine imaging space. So this was a piece of capital equipment that we sold, but we also had a really interesting annuity model where it was the equivalent of what today we call SaaS or cloud computing. So we would have a fee for service for people that wanted to be able to use extra features that the system had. It was a great experience, and it was a great way to start off my career. I then moved to a company where we worked on products that were in the cardiorespiratory space. I was the VP of operations and R&D for this company, and we took the company public in 2001. So that was my first IPO, which was kind of an exciting ride for anyone to go through. Our flagship products were the world's first fully electronic stethoscope. That's the thing the doctor uses to listen to your heart sounds and lung sounds, as well as a very innovative respiratory rate monitor. So this is something that monitors how well you are breathing, what your rate is, and the volume of air that you were breathing in. So these were our two main products. And actually, right after we brought the second one to market, we attracted the attention of a Southern California company, large multinational company, that they wanted to have that breathing rate monitor in their portfolio. So they actually bought the company. So it was part of a transaction of, following the IPO, now the company gets purchased by a large American company. I had a chance to go through my second IPO with this company. This company is called Masimo, by the way, because 2 years after they had purchased our company, we actually went public at Masimo as well. That was a totally different ride, going through an IPO as an American company as opposed to a Canadian company. It was kind of interesting. Following these great rides and this great experience with a large company, I decided to try a startup of my own. And so I founded a company in the neuro space with like an absolute whiz when it came to signal processing and machine learning and AI. This was working with some researchers at McGill University that had developed this really interesting technology that would allow us to assess whether or not a patient that arrived in the OR had bleeding in the brain. And this is something that can be done on the spot, like a minute, as opposed to having to send somebody for a CT scan. The project was fantastic. We managed to attract investment from all of the prominent VCs at the time in Canada, as well as leveraging off of all of every possible government program we applied for and obtained as part of our leveraging of the VC money that came into that. We ended that project after the first in-human trial that we did, because we realized that the technology wasn't quite ready for the big league. So we returned the IP to the university in the hopes that they would actually be able to continue working on it and address some of the shortcomings. After that, I worked for several years in consulting. I worked on projects ranging from class 1 to class 3 medical devices, from bone injection, bone cement injection devices on one end, to implantable devices that actually were Bluetooth enabled on the other end, and had an opportunity to work with most of the largest blue chip companies in the world working in the consulting field. And finally, I was brought back to Montreal by the CEO of ODS Medical, which is now Reveal, known as Reveal Surgical. He talked to me about this very exciting neurodiagnostic product that he was in the process of developing. And not only was the technology really interesting, the clinical need was massive, because it allowed surgeons to make sure that they got all of the cancer out when they were operating on patients. So not only was the technology really exciting, but he actually had an understanding of company culture that I had not seen before. Like, he really valued the people, what do we have to do to set the framework to have a successful company? And that brings me here today.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. And I guess maybe that will be our starting off point. And you can take us there. Is, in a nutshell, what is so important about company culture? Why is this an important topic, and why should people pay attention to it?
Yeah, it's a blueprint, if you like, for making decisions. Or at least this is the way that we view it. It's a set of rules of engagement. So everyone in the company knows that these set of rules or values are how we expect everyone to be making their day-to-day decisions. So if you make a decision, if an employee makes a decision following that set of rules, then we will always have their back, because they're always doing all of the things that we believe are the right things to be doing for the company. And so that setting of those rules, that rules of engagement, are really, really important. And these are not technology capability rules. These are how to be with other people. What kind of company do we want to be creating? What kind of people do we want to be surrounded with? That's what these rules are all about. And we reinforce these rules constantly. So it clearly defines, all of the qualities that we expect people to be exhibiting at all times, and they can trust, the staff can trust that as the leadership team, that we also will follow all of these same rules. And so it becomes very easy, very transparent, and it creates a culture of trust in the company.
Mark, maybe you can join us here at this point. How does that fit with your experience across the different companies that you've been involved with?
Well, I think one of the points Victor brought up that is really true is, unfortunately, this is more it's more unusual than the norm that people look at this. So I was lucky in my career that the first company I worked with, Nova Chemicals, culture was really important. So there were definitely rules, if you will, or a way of working that was reinforced on how you treated others, how you informed others. So I'll give you an example. We made it very normal to engage people like at the technician level. Hey, this is why you're doing something. You're part of our project. We need you to deliver these types of things so then we can meet these goals. That, since I've worked in other places, that's more unusual than normal, but that created an environment where everyone felt like they were valued. And so people do work because it means something, not just because they get a paycheck. And so to me, by having this really strong culture, not only does it allow you to say, hey, if you make a mistake, we've got your back and we're going to learn from it. And there could be something that we then use to modify maybe our rules a bit or whatever. But it also means that people feel like the work they do means something and they're going to be contributing to something bigger than literally just making some measurements or submitting some report.
Right. I think that's crucial. The idea that it's more than just the money, right? We're here for a lot of different reasons. But maybe just to go back a step and to suit it to the audience we have today, a lot of the people we're talking to, or here with us rather, are just going to be starting up their company. So why is this such an important topic for a startup company? I mean, shouldn't they just be focused on their operations and getting profitability? Why should they pay attention to this now? Maybe Victor, since you are in the startup phase right now, you can tell us about how you see this issue.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you, I mean, having gone through a number of startups and even the large companies, trying to fix poor company culture is way, way, way harder and more costly than trying to get it right from the get-go. It's really easy to sit around the conference table when you're half a dozen or 20 people and trying to define what kind of company you want to be creating, and to use those people around the table as your missionaries for spreading that word, to all of the next generation of hires that you have. That is way, way, way easier to implement than trying to do this with a 2,000 person company. And you're looking around and you're saying, oh my God, this is such a toxic environment. How the heck did we get here? It's really, really hard to change a toxic environment once it's reached that point. So the earlier you do it, the more important it is. And it also, like, defining who you want to be surrounded with is good for you too. It's not just good for the company, right? It's like entrepreneurs are a special breed of people that, they're less risk averse than most people, right? So they tend to go with the flow a little bit easier and adapt easier and everything like that. And their minds work a little differently than the average person. But in order for that founder or that entrepreneur to be successful, they really need the rest of the team to get what it is that they're trying to do. And yeah.
That's an interesting point about how the entrepreneur mindset might be different than, say, a large organization where you no longer have that behind you. Mark, at this point, did you want to add anything? How do you see it at the startup phase, company culture?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of judging in competitions, et cetera. I can't say it ever comes up, but I can also say from my experience, I've seen startups where it was clear there was misalignment of mission, vision, and values, and it's pretty rare that they survived that without massive change. The other thing too, per Victor's point, is training and replacing people is incredibly expensive. And often that's a result of poor culture. So you will have a revolving door of people, and probably you will be saying it's their fault. Why can't I just find the right people rather than looking in the mirror? I know, sure, Victor's seen the same thing, and it's like, well, no, it has to start from that culture. And I think the entrepreneurial mindset is really important to recognize that when so I'll give you an example. So at Nova, we decided to look at how we did projects. And we realized that people who are amazing at starting projects are the worst at finishing them. They don't have those capabilities. They're wired to do really cool things. They're not wired to tie it up in a nice package and put the bow on top. They just don't do that. So you may find more of that early stage type of approach in a startup, but you've got to get other people with you that can do some of that. And you've got to be honest to say, I'm not very good at some of these things. So that also comes in building your team, but building your team, you've got to have the right culture to do it. It's not just picking people with resumes. If it's not a fit for how you want to bring the company forward, and what are you going to value, what are you going to prioritize, and how you treat others and each other, you're going to have these fits and starts, and you probably will be wondering, why on earth is it? Our tech's great. Well, you've got to think of the culture, and people, I think, should start that much earlier than they do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think also just the bit about entrepreneurs, how they're constantly pushing limits and they might not see their own limitations. And so that can be a blind spot that I think can lead to problems. Victor, I think you wanted to add a point there.
Yeah, just to follow up on Mark's point, I think that, I mean, hanging on to resources has always been hard, but there's no doubt about that. Like your best resources are always going to be targets for other companies, right? But I think with in the current context with COVID, and well, actually with our current context period, it's become even harder to do it. And so as a startup, you don't necessarily have the means to hang on to your top resources by just paying them more money. There has to be more to it to make them want to be part of the company. And that more to it is really the value system of the company. Like, do they feel like they are participating in something worthwhile? Are they just as passionate about, you know, your mission and your vision and whatnot? Like, those are the things that make them want to get up and go to work, because this is cool stuff that we're doing. And my supervisor really values me. And he or she told me that already. Like, just yesterday, she complimented me in front of everybody. Like, these are things that are so important to being able to retain people. And if that culture of valuing your staff is not there, it's impossible. You will always get your best resources taken away from you.
Okay, well, maybe with that, you can delve a bit more into the blueprint that you talked about, and we can go into the point of how to establish and maintain a viable working culture at your company. So you have a very transparent system. It's very rule-based. Maybe can you tell us maybe perhaps some of the values or rules that you do have in place?
Yeah, and so I won't go through all of our values. We only have 5, and you know, you having 25 is not better than having 5. Let me tell you that. They have to be simple. They have to be easy for people to iterate, and they are really about soft skills. So, like Mark was mentioning, learning from mistakes. That is actually one of our values. We want our people to do something and risk making a mistake, because that information is so valuable to the company, because not only them, but everyone in the group can learn from a mistake. It's a great data point. And as long as that mistake is made following our values, right, of things that we consider are important, that is great. We will always have the back of that person. And so we have our 5 values that we sat down and generated. Within 2 weeks after I arrived at Reveal Surgical, we sat down and defined what this company was going to be. And we make it part of our hiring process. Every candidate, we actually have one session where we just evaluate whether or not we think that they can meet our values. And it doesn't matter how brilliant that person is. If they don't have the capability to meet our values, then they don't get hired at our company. And every performance review that we do, and we do one about 6 months after the person's been hired, and then yearly thereafter, that is the first section that we look at is, how are you doing on your values? And anyone who doesn't score 5 out of 5, like top marks on your values, we're having a very difficult discussion with that person. Right. So we define them early. We make sure that people know what they're getting themselves into if they do decide to join us, because we make it very clear, these are our values. You've got to be comfortable with that. And we reinforce it constantly.
Right. Mark, is that something that fits with your experience, or perhaps it's a bit of an outlier based on what you were saying before?
Well, the part that actually fits really well is, so just in our innovation and partnerships office, it's really an amalgamation of two teams, and we added a third. So it's really starting over again. And so I recognized that we needed to do some team building, and I reached out to a friend of mine who's fantastic at this, and we had a great discussion. She said, you can't do this in a day. What you're trying to do is way bigger. You're building a culture. So we put a program together. And we worked a lot on this for a lot of prep work. And it was maybe the second meeting, someone in the group said, why are we doing this? What are we about? And it was at that moment I realized we had not defined our culture well enough. So we pivoted and worked on mission, vision, and values. And it was great because we actually had the team helping set them. So it wasn't like, here they are, like from a mountaintop on high, just follow these, and like, I don't know what these mean or they represent. So it was actually a great opportunity. We were lucky. It's to Victor's point. At that time, we were maybe 19 or 20. That's a whole lot easier to do. Now we're 27 or 28. It starts to get more unwieldy. You probably put it off. So that was fortuitous in a way. And my other experience, and this was at Nova, which is a much bigger company. So in Calgary, we probably had 400 people. We had plants all over North America. We had offices all over the place. So a couple thousand people, but everyone got training and resources. So it wasn't like, here's our mission, vision, values, pick it up. So we would do training around how to give feedback. We had other training sessions on how to do kind of the softer part of your job, all the way to things like, a lot on safety, driver's ed. Like, it was really around just the whole way you represent the company and how you act. I was lucky in my career, I will say, to have very good mentors as well on that. So if the culture is so ingrained, then the people you work with help instill it as well. So to me, yes, Victor's absolutely correct. I've seen the same thing, but I've also, in a larger company, there may be a need to resource that up so you can make sure people are really getting, if they need some training or a way to actually follow these, you're not just leaving them on their own.
Right.
If I could add something to Mark, I mean, I'm right with you, Mark. You got to walk the walk, right? Or walk the talk, whatever that expression is. You got to show that you really care about these things. We did something similar on the training side. We actually embraced this approach to communicating called radical candor. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about this. You should Google it if you haven't, because it's actually very worthwhile. And it's really about challenging directly, but caring deeply at the same time. And so this was a 6-week seminar that we set up, and everyone in the company attended. And it really set out examples of, how do you give feedback? How do you give feedback in a way where it's constructive and not just seen as a criticism on the other individual? Because, some people, like Mark is very eloquent. Like he can probably tell you off, and it will be with a smile, and you probably won't even be insulted. He's like really, really good at being able to give feedback. But a lot of people are not that good at giving feedback. So allowing people this opportunity to go through some of these courses, learning how to communicate, is really, really, really helpful. Last fall, we followed that up with an improv session, just to give people an opportunity to just, be in an environment where they have to speak up, and it doesn't matter how silly what they're going to say is or do is. It's just great to be up there, and we all laugh and share the experience together. And it's like, these kind of team building activities are really good, and they go a long way. I mean, our staff is still talking about both of these sessions.
Yeah, if I can add to that. So I've done tons of team building, and the very first ones I did were drinking sessions. They seem great, but at the end of the day, you don't achieve anything. You need to make them focused on something that's going to improve your company. So totally, fun is part of it, but you really should be doing that. So kudos that you've done that. And the second is, I did a lot of feedback training. So that was part of what we did at Nova, especially, but we also had a culture where you could do that. Like, I remember seeing something from the vice president that I thought didn't resonate with what we should be doing. And so I called them And I gave him the feedback, and he was open to it because that was the culture. You could call up the vice president or the president and talk to them. Whereas you have other cultures that are like, not a chance would you ever do that unless you want to make a career limiting move. So I think you can do, it's to your walking the talk point. You could have the training, but if it's like, do that and you're out, clearly that's not aligned, right? So you have to have both. You've got to have that culture that says, we want to do this and we're going to give you the tools so you can be good at it.
Right, right. Victor, your company sounds very proactive on this. You've talked about the sessions you're holding and so on. If we look at the larger companies, it's a different story. And an obvious way of, say, identifying the toxic culture at work is where you have a high turnover rate and people leaving the company. But in a smaller startup setting, it might not be so obvious. You might not have people quitting right away, and yet you know that there's something wrong. Can you tell us a little bit about how you can spot what is wrong and then what do you do about it? And it might not be what you're living through now. It sounds like you guys have a system in place, but perhaps based on previous experience.
Yeah, there are some, it's a really good question. There are definitely some telltale signs. I think one of them is, a lack of engagement. So you're looking at your staff and, there are always challenges coming up. And you see that those challenges are just thrown over the fence instead of people wanting to grab them and trying to solve them themselves. This kind of like just trying to do the minimum is definitely a sign that there's a problem here. There's either a problem with that individual, but if you see that that is happening in a lot of individuals, then you know that this is a company culture issue. Second telltale sign is looking at dialogue, how people discuss issues together. If there's no discussion, if people talk about things and nobody challenges them, nobody says, that's weird, why'd you do it that way? Or something like that, in a very respectful way. Like if that is not happening, if there's no dialogue about things, then you know that you're in trouble. Because no one is ever going to speak up when they spot things that aren't going in the right direction, and that kills companies, because now you're relying on only the leadership team to try to foresee everything that is happening, and it's impossible. You need your entire team to be looking at what we're doing every single day to make sure we're doing the right things, not just 3-4 people at the leadership level. So I think those two are big signals for me. If I don't see discussion, if I don't see that any kind of engagement or wanting to take ownership, voluntarily trying to take ownership over things. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's ways you can see that. Yeah, so I do a lot of judging, and I've worked in a couple of startups too. And it's this communication thing is usually my giveaway. So when I see a team pitch, and literally no one says anything but one person, every question goes to one person, they take over. Wait, all like right away, I've got a red, the spidey sense is tingling that something is weird here. That, yeah, there's a team of 4, but it's 1 and 3 lackeys. That's not a sustainable approach to me. Or the other one, and it's to Victor's point, yeah, but you have to go to see it, walk around the place. If no one is communicating and everyone's just sitting there working in like literally a silo, there's something off. That's not normal. And especially with so many of our work environments are more open anyway. Yeah, you want to be quiet, but people should be talking to each other. I've gone to a couple places on visits, and there's something about the vibe that tells you there's probably people walking on eggshells here. And if somebody makes a mistake, the boss is going to go nuts or something. And so you can feel it in the communication and how people talk to each other. So it's building off Victor's point. I see the same thing, but that's the one to me, when there's this communication issue or this domination by a person, that I'm concerned.
Right.
And that's gotten a lot harder with the COVID context, because I don't know, I'm working from my home office, and I think a lot of people are working from home office. So it's harder to spot that now. That lack of communication, camaraderie, and whatnot, it's really become challenging.
Yeah. So when you bring people in for interviews, like that's the kind of thing. It'd be hard because you're probably doing everything by Zoom now. But if they showed up to you and you were interviewing them and they walked around and saw that might be like, okay, that if I was interviewing at your place and I walked around and I saw this, now with my experience, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to have to dig on this as to whether this is an opportunity for me. Victor's right, though. The dynamics have changed. So you might go down the path, go start a company, and in a company, and realize 2 weeks in, I've made a very large mistake.
Right, right. But it also depends, I think, on the way a company is structured too, right? Where if you have a very hierarchical system, it might be a bit difficult for the lower or junior employees to feed those problems up the chain, up to the senior who might not see what's going on, right? I think we talked about this earlier, Victor, where you were on the one hand a bit against the idea of just a flat organization, because at the same time it kind of can also kill motivation. But nevertheless, if you get too stratified, then you can have that communication gap where people might be hesitating to bring problems up. Okay, well, I guess the one other question we had was, what about the external view? You know, and Mark, you touched on this when you're a judge in competitions. That's one aspect. But later on, companies will be asking for investment. They're going to do pitches, which is in a sense of kind of competition. Do investors actually pay attention to this? Aren't they more interested in just making, selling the company eventually? How important is this? And maybe Victor, you can comment on this, having been through the IPO process amongst other fundraisings.
Yes, yeah. So I could tell you that the term company culture is a recent term. So if you ask an investor and say, what do you think about company culture? I think some of the younger ones will say, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is, and it's like everything that Mark described before. Some of the older investors won't recognize it that way, but they'll call it dynamics, company dynamics, and so they are keenly interested in the company dynamic because they know that it's not the CEO that's going to be delivering, on the promises. It's the team that is going to deliver on the promises. And so they will come in and they will insist on walking through the cubicles or offices or whatever, just to see the interactions. Is everyone like just shying away, like what Mark was saying, shying away in the little corner, pretending, trying not to be seen by this person because they're afraid that if they say something, they might say the wrong thing and then they're going to get fired? Or is there a good dynamic where people can actually feel comfortable talking? Is there trust in the team? So these are things that I don't know if they're specifically trained for that, but I could tell you that all of the investors that I work with, they're really good at that. They're really good at spotting team dynamics. And they go around and they look at the founders, and they even like do little tests just to see what would happen, if they ask a particular question to one of the founders that they think is going to be a little bit controversial, that might slightly contradict what the CEO said or what the CTO said or whatever. They'll try to even test it just to see what that dynamic is. So I think it's super important to the investors to feel that out, because they're investing in a team. They're not investing in an individual.
Yeah, like you read any business book and they will tell you the team matters, but team isn't just, oh, I'll check the boxes. You've got an engineer, you've got somebody in sales, you've got somebody in marketing. That's part of it, but it's how that team actually works and how they're going to be able to deliver on what the business is going to do. And so it's really true. And another thing, I know I've been involved in a couple of cases where investors have called me, hey, we're thinking of investing in such and such company. We know, let's say they license technology from you. Let's talk about that company and how they operate. So it's like, so I've been a reference a number of times, and the questions are, they're never about, do you think the tech will work? Almost. It's always team related and the people. Do they have blind spots? Do you see the blind spots? And they don't. They will ask me that for sure. And if I'm like, well, yeah, there's a giant one, I've told them many times, and they ignore it, guaranteed that's not going to help them get investment. So right. You are always kind of under a review process at every level. So, and if you have a good culture, that makes it a much easier discussion. I've had a couple of conversations. It's a little more difficult for me to actually say that I personally believe in the company, and it's never the tech. It's how they operate, how they treat their employees, what they, the human side of it is usually what trips them up.
Right. Well, maybe this can take us into our next topic. And Victor, you've mentioned this before, how there's certain, you can call in consultants. Mark, you talked about the consultants you've brought in, and you can have special exercises. Victor, you have the rules in place for your company. But again, for the smaller startups who have limited time and resources, what are a couple of tips you can give them on how they can, once they've spotted there might be a lack of engagement, what are small things on a day-to-day basis, on an interpersonal basis, they might do to begin to correct their ship, so to speak? Maybe Mark, I'll start with you if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is super important, and Victor mentioned it too, but I'll put a word to, is gratitude. So I think there are really simple things you can do to say thank you to people. So I've been in a case where I would provide an update on what my team did, and every week that was shared by the leader, but it was mostly that, hey, props to so-and-so for doing this. It just little things like that were really nice. That costs you no money. You don't really need specific training to do it. So, I mean, there's stuff like that right away shows caring, which at the end of the day is what this is all about, frankly. So that's one I've seen be highly effective. So there's obviously a lot of things you can read as well, but I think the other one that I like a lot is regular update meetings. So even if it's just half hour, like, hey, here's what's going on, and if somebody asks you a brutally honest question, you deal with it. So I think it's good to have regular meetings with, if you have a 20-person company, that it's not just, well, the engineering group meets. Because when I worked in engineering consulting, that's exactly what it's like. You never meet virtually together. It's mechanical does its thing, electrical does theirs, process does theirs. Project management tries to make them all work together. But we often didn't get the big picture, or it was rare, maybe once every couple of months. I would do that more regularly, because I do find people want to know, again, back to this point, why am I doing this? What's the greater goal here? And okay, now I see how my making this piece on the widget actually fits into something that's much broader than I had thought. So to me, those are two really easy things that anybody can do. You have to make it a priority. Oh, and the third, you've got to spend time objective setting. I know it's a lot of work, having done it, and may not be what you want to spend time, but spend time every year, make sure people know what they're doing, why they're doing it, have review meetings. If they have to change objectives, you do that. But it's all this idea around making sure people understand the greater goal and how they fit in it, and that you're a guide to them and you're able to help them get to that point.
And I guess the objective setting could even work in between founders, for example. It doesn't necessarily have to be a vertical top-down thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's not done enough. That's actually a good point.
Yeah. Victor, did you have any points to contribute on how a smaller little things can be done on a day-to-day basis?
Wow, Mark, you hit most of my points, but I'm gonna maybe add, first thing is communication. So nothing beats sharing information with your staff, the good and the bad. Like you want to, when things are going well, you're lining up, the investors are on board, everything is going in the right direction, great, communicate that. You've got partners, commercial partners that are at the table, and they want to know, how they can help you bring your product to market. Communicate that, like communicate all of those things for sure. But when things are not going well, that communication is very important, because if you don't give them the information, they will invent information on their own just by the body language that you exhibit. And so it's a quick way to lose trust in your people if you're not transparent about both the good and the bad things that can happen. The second thing I would say is the story that you're telling to the outside world, like your potential investors and your commercialization partners or whomever the outside world is, that story, you need to be telling that story internally too, because people need to know like why they should be passionate about the things that they're doing. So you constantly have to like remind them, this is why this is important, because people want to work on important and valuable things. They don't want to They don't want to just make thimbles, for a living. I mean, they could do that anywhere. But if they're working with you in a startup and taking a chance on a high risk venture like a startup where probably 9 out of 10 don't make it, right? They need to know that it's worthwhile, not just financially worthwhile, but it's a meaningful thing that is potentially going to change the lives of many people. And so tell that story internally. That's really, really important. Mark was mentioning objectives. So we do, every year we set our yearly objectives. Every quarter we set our quarter objectives. We call them rocks, actually. And those quarterly objectives get turned into sprint planning sessions every 2 weeks. So we are constantly reinforcing, this is what we need to accomplish this year to stay on track. These are the important things that we have to do this quarter to make sure that we meet those yearly objectives. And by the way, over the next 2 weeks, we need to be able to accomplish these things. So it's a combination of 2 approaches. One is called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. There's a book by Gino Wickman. If you can get your hands on that book on Amazon, it's like $20. It's great. It's well spent money, and it goes through how to set up your company for success, including how to define your objectives, how to measure them, how to make sure that you're always on track. And then Agile project management for the sprint planning. It really, really, really does a great job because you're constantly able to measure how well you are doing. How are you actually going to be able to meet your yearly objectives? The worst thing you can do is not measure what you're setting out to do. Like you want to have a way to always make sure that, hey, if I keep doing this, am I going to make it by the end of the year? Am I going to make it by the end of the quarter? You need to have that information on a much more frequent basis than just once per quarter or once per year. So measure constantly your progress on things, whether you believe in Agile or you want to use a waterfall kind of method with Microsoft Project, or whatever method you want to use. Measure, because that's also a good early indicator of poor cultures. If you see that you're not meeting your 2 week tasks, and that something is going wrong here, that the team needs something, they're not engaged, your tasks are stupid, they don't make any sense, and nobody's telling you that. Like these are great ways to tell if there's a problem and to get feedback on them.
Great, thanks for that. I think all this is underlying the fact that work ultimately is a shared experience. It's not given from one person to another. It's something we all do together, and so you have to respect all members who are contributing to that goal. And so with that in mind, I think I'm going to, rather than taking questions on a chat basis, I'll just invite anyone to turn their cameras back on the microphone and just identify yourself, and we'll open up for a question and answer period. Hopefully there's some interest or some other points that people want to know about company culture. So yeah, the floor is open. Anyone wants to ask anything, please go ahead. Just let us know who you are and then jump into it. Ashwack, I can start with you.
Yes, I'll start. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mark and Victor. It was really informative session and a lot to observe. And I have really here a question. First, I will start with the company introduction. I'm the founder and CEO of MVCare. At MVCare, we develop nano biomaterials to control implant infections, and we're starting with dental implant market. We are a McGill spin-off company, and we are ready to launch our first product after finishing our clinical study. My question, or maybe even my need or challenge since I started this company, is to find a co-founder. We are a really good technical and scientist team, but we're looking for more business and marketing as we are approaching launching the product. My question here, after let's say 2 to 3 years of starting a company, is there a specific approach or a method to target co-founders? It's easy when we build a company and when we start the company, but after really progressing or having really passing through a process of building a company, incorporation, and also having a product, I feel it more difficult to attract co-founders at this stage, or even to find the right co-founder. Is there any tricks to do it, or even method to attract the good people or right people for this position?
Yeah, I could start since your mic is on mute. I would say do a little bit of introspection first. What are you lacking in capabilities? Like, I don't know, you were looking for a co-founder, so I assume that you want to actually be part of this company. You don't want to, give it out to somebody else and continue your day job. You want to be part of that company. So look at you as a founder. What are you missing for yourself? What skill set, what capabilities are you missing? That's what you have to be looking for. And then to find those people, network. If you just go to your LinkedIn contacts, go to the free conferences and talks like, this great lunch and learn session, all these kind of things are great ways to network. If you're looking for something, if you have a problem, you ask people, and you'd be surprised at the kind of feedback that you can get, or the kind of help that you can get. Like someone will say, hey, wow, you know what? I know a business development guy that is, he or she reached like the highest point that they can reach at Boston Scientific or at Medtronic or whatever, and they're looking for a way to actually do more than that. They want, they're stuck at director level, they want to be a VP. Maybe this is an opportunity for them to grow to a next level, because it's going to take them 20 years to get there at that larger corporation. So, just talk about it, just network, but start with the introspection. What skills do you know you need in order to be able to have a successful company?
Yeah, and I would just build off that, because I was going to say the same thing around, you need to make it complementary to what you do. And that means being honest with yourself. I can tell you, when I do a lot of stuff at the Dobson Cup, I'll see these 3 engineers coming up pitching something like, we're going to grow our team with the money if we win. I say, oh, great. What are you going to add? Oh, another engineer. It's like, why on earth are you doing that? You need to look at where you are as a company and what you need to get to the next level. And that can change over time. So you made somebody, like you see that, we see this a lot, and I'm sure Victor does as well, that the people change, because the ones at the very beginning who, to get the business moving, maybe are more on the tech side, but now you've passed that hurdle and maybe you're at that point. Now the person you bring in really does need different skills. So that's where the introspection comes in, that, okay, I am maybe still more technically savvy. I'm not so great on customer relation building, sales channels, things of that nature. I need that type of person instead. And I would just add, this is just me, but I think we often only look for people who have like everything, like they've worked in the exact same field for like the competitor. Sometimes you have to think a little more outside the box, because it might be, they might have worked in chemicals, but what they did is that skill set that you need. And sometimes you can get people, especially to start, like, oh, that's cool, I'd like to take a risk on that. So I've seen, maybe more lately, Victor can say if this is true, but I see lately, like, okay, I'm seeing some people that didn't come through this industry, you're now hiring at senior levels. It's because of that skill set. It's not just because they had the right degree or they had worked for the right company before this.
I think that's very well said, Mark. And I would add maybe one more thing. I didn't think of it before, and that is, if you're looking for a partner or co-founder, all right, be ready to actually share the company with that person. Like if you're trying to get a co-founder and you're going to give them 1% stock options, that's not really going to entice, your ideal kind of candidate. You're better off, trying to do it yourself, because you're never going to attract the right people. So you have to be ready to share the company. If this is a co-founder and you want to make that person that has skills that you don't possess yourself want to join your company and share in the ride and share in the success, they have to have a good piece of the action. So when I did my startup, I had all of the, everything lined up, and I knew I could not do it myself. And I identified the individual that I wanted to have, and I gave him a huge chunk of the company to join me. With that, and for me, that was, having half of a pie is better than having 99% of a pie, but the pie is nothing. So having a half of a big pie is fantastic. So be ready to share that, because hogging on to shares isn't going to do you very much good, especially I guess in the project that you described. You're probably going to need investors. You're going to be diluted anyway down, right? So you want to make sure that you are comfortable with that right up front. Like, you start adopting that mentality that, it's okay. Let me bring in the right people so that we have success and we do this.
So I'll be using this platform to spread then the needs. So I'm looking for a business person, business development and business marketing background, because that's what I lack and I want to learn. As a person came from academia and scientist, I've been really progressing a lot in the business side, but I still feel I'm missing this customer relation, marketing, talking to investors or even distributions, because we're moving to the market. And also to help, because doing everything in business side is a lot to handle, especially with culture. And if you or Mark, anyone here in this platform knows someone who could recommend to me, that will be great. I will also have a follow-up question. Sorry for the baby here. Follow-up question is, if I find this person, should this person be with experience working in a company, or just, let's say, have experience working in a big company, is not as entrepreneur, or let's say just fresh graduate? Do you think this will be a good fit for a co-founder, first time co-founder in our company?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So once you've done your introspection and you've identified, what it is, what complementary skills that you need, right? You've got to think about, what is it going to take to make that investor want to invest in your company?
Yeah.
Because they're investing in the team. So when they look at it, are they going to be able to say, I think this team is capable of delivering? So whoever you choose has to allow the investor to be able to say, yes, I think this team is capable of delivering. Sometimes that means, they want more experienced people in the picture, people that have done it before. Other times, if there are no comparables in the stuff that you are doing, having someone that has done it before isn't really bringing you as much. Maybe they want to see someone that is hungry, and they're eager and they're ready to make the cold calls on all of the other companies, because this is such a new technology. You've got to educate the market. So it really depends. You've got to answer the question of, what is it going to take to make that investor believe that the team can deliver?
Yeah, so what you really want to think about is credibility. So for your case, what's going to be credible? And it may be, as Victor said, immense experience, or it may be, no, they're so cutting edge because they just came from this. There's hardly anyone in the world doing it. I want the guy who knows how to do that. So that introspection, I think that's another part of it, is what will be the most credible team to the investors you're going to go to.
I think Mark Driscoll, you had raised a hand for a question. Sorry to cut everyone off there. Go ahead, Mark.
No worries. I see we're coming up on the hour, so I'll flip it to a comment, and then I'll allow Victor and Mark to comment. But first, Victor and Mark, really nice talk. I enjoyed listening to a lot of the points, and I wrote down some of the books you suggested, Victor. So I think my comment is a lot of the kind of hindsight and experience that you offer is great. I think execution is often a challenge with startup and the lack of experience. Like, for example, in the hiring process and so forth. I think an underutilized venue, especially when we're strapped for cash, are mentors. So, a comment, people should look into mentorship. And to you too, maybe if you want to comment, do you know of any kind of startup mentorship? Advisors are one thing, but you got to kind of pay for it, so to speak. So do you have any mentorship societies that you would suggest or that you're aware of?
I can say that we are trying to add the mentoring platform to this. It's gone a little slower than we thought because we want to piggyback off something McGill's already doing. It makes it a lot easier than having different platforms and you're not really sure. So that's coming, Mark. And that is going to broaden the number of people you'll have access to. We've already talked to them that we will get like a subgroup off that, so we can make it so it's not like literally anybody, but it's maybe a subset, but that may allow you to then, it will have filters in it. So maybe you need somebody, a mentor, but knows about business in Europe, for example, because maybe for your market, that's the key. That should be part of the filtering. So I can let you know that it's coming. Junji has been spending a lot of time on it. I think we're getting closer now, but we're just trying to tie it into when McGill does the introduction of the platform. So that's one tangible for sure.
Thanks, Mark.
I think one other thing is, as like if you see some people that have gray hair like me, chances are they do like to talk about their experiences along the way. And if you had a question like, how would I go about doing something like this? A lot of them are just very, very happy to help. I mean, I'm here. Mark asked me to join here, and I'm sure you'll find a lot of people that are not like starting their careers, but rather, well established in their careers, that are totally happy to provide some guidance and whatnot. And we do it for free. As far as I'm concerned, like, if you have a question, just feel free to reach out to me. And if I know the answer to it, or I know someone that can help you answer that question, I'd be only too happy to do it, because I was in your shoes. I'm assuming that you are an entrepreneur. I started in those very same shoes, and it's tough on your own. Definitely is tough on your own. But one of the things that I did was, I actually, before I did my the startup with the McGill researchers, I actually met with half a dozen of the local successful serial entrepreneurs. So I scouted them, I found them on LinkedIn, I reached out to them and I said, hey, can I buy you a coffee? I just want to pick your brain on what works, what doesn't work. Actually, a lot of the things that we talked about today. And they were just so happy to meet with me and just talk to me about their experiences. And many of these people I still have relationships with. And so, yeah, I think you'll find that the hardest part is getting the courage to ask the question. It's not, you'll find that getting the answers to your questions are a lot easier. Well, at least that has been my experience.
Thank
And
you,
as a shameless plug, we have an event. We fixed the date, Junji, in June for
Yes,
our
it's
in-person?
June 14th.
June 14th. It's going to be at the faculty club. Everyone here is invited. So we're having anyone who's been involved at the MIF so far. So that's judges on the panels, that's people on the advisory board, that's technology transfer managers. So we've got a pretty good guest list. That's a great place to network, like Victor said. So you can, and to you, Ashwath, that's a great place to go talk to people, because they're all there because they want to be. They all understand what you're going through. Many of them are really keen on seeing you all be successful. So shameless plug, June 14th, please join us, it's free. So hopefully we'll be able to have a great turnout and now do some of these things in person, where it's a lot easier compared to doing it by Zoom.
Maybe just one last question, if there's anyone else who wanted to Jean-Pierre.
Yeah, hi,
Please,
how's it going?
go ahead.
Yeah, thanks Mark and Victor for the talk. It was really interesting. Lots of good pointers. And I hope most people have experienced like what it is to have to be in a good company, where you have people do the extra mile, even if they're not necessarily paid for that overtime or like whatever they have to do, come in on the weekend or whatnot, to do the work that needs to be done. And that's amazing. And you talked about a lot about the values and how that actually encourage people to get into this company culture where people are willing to work with the company. But how do you pick the right values? I mean, I can open a bunch of books that are dedicated to like values for startups, but how do you pick the ones that are right for your company? And which one have you seen based on your experience are really good ones, and which ones are maybe not so good to have in that 5-value playbook that Victor talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I could start by saying that it's not easy, and you shouldn't try to rush it, right? It took us 2 days to finalize our values, and so we went offsite. We brought in a facilitator, and it was whiteboard, Post-its, and we just kicked off all of the things that were important to the individual people first. We all said, I want to be in a company that has, these attributes or these kind of people. And we put all of those on the whiteboard, and then we just took a look at the common themes. And it's a process that will take an investment, but if you make that 2-day investment, the quality of what you get at the end of that is going to be very, very good. And I mean, we did it with a facilitator. I think it helps to have someone who has gone through that process before. I'm sure someone in Mark's team is probably awesome in that already that can help out. But if you can't afford a facilitator, it's really what I just described. Just whiteboard it and put the time into defining what company you want to create. It's not harder than that, but you can't rush it.
Okay, so it's kind of a group decision of what people value and kind of all agree on it, so that you actually just dig up the values that are actually already in people's mind.
Yes, absolutely. And stay away from the technical value, like saying that you value type A personalities. Those are not great values. Or saying that you value people that work overtime. That's probably not a good value either. You're not going to get a lot of people to buy into this when you're trying to hire. So think of, eventually you're going to be putting these values in front of a potential new hire, and they're going to look at that and say, yep, I want to be part of this company. So keep that filter or that lens in front of your final values that you come up with.
And it comes back to, you have to be able to live them. If they're really just words on a page and no one ever does them, that doesn't help. Or they're so generic. It's like, well, any company, of course, is going to value some of these things, but how do you actually reflect it in what you do? So that's why I agree with Victor. Like when we did this too, it was a couple sessions and we were facilitated as well. So facilitation is great if you can afford it. If not, it's still okay. Do it and then sleep on it and then come back and say, I wrote this and now I don't even know what that means anymore. And if you can do it together is great too, because then it's not like, well, it's imposed, like, well, I don't see this, you don't behave this way, or, I don't get it. So that's really important. So I know when we were done, we said, hey, look at this. Does this reflect who you are? And if it doesn't, let's talk about why and maybe see if we have to make changes.
All right, thanks.
Cool. You're welcome.
Well, we've gone over time, so I think I'll stop things here, although there's plenty more for discussion. A big thank you to Victor for taking the time to join us today. Really appreciate your presence and your guidance. Your advice was invaluable. And thank you to Mark for sharing your experience. Again, maybe people weren't so familiar with your life before McGill. And so thank you to everyone. And yes, a reminder, June 14th, Sanka set, that's in the evening, 5 to 7 at the McGill Faculty Club, all invited. We'll be putting up more information on that soon. There'll be a save the date email going out, and then a formal invitation will follow after that. We have a special guest that evening. We won't disclose that now, but it will be very interesting and I think very much worth your while. So thanks once again for joining us for Lunch and Learn. We'll be back with another Lunch and Learn later in the summer. We don't have an exact date yet, but typically it's the third Thursday of the month. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me. All right.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks so much, Victor.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, everyone.